Stroll spun at the start and then did nothing. Every time I get into the driver ratings, every time I get down to Lance Stroll, it's like, oh my God.
Hello and welcome to the Autosport F1 podcast, and in this episode we'll be taking a look back at the Mexican Grand Prix, where Lando Norris cruised to a 7th win of his F1 season in 2025, with Charles Leclerc holding off Max Verstappen for second, although with some help from a virtual safety car that we will definitely be talking about a little bit later on. Norris now leads the championship by a single point from McLaren teammate Oscar Piastri, who could only manage 5th on a poor weekend, really, behind the big surprise of the weekend, Ollie Bearman for Haas taking 4th place, having never run in the top 6 in a full Grand Prix before. So, joining me to talk about the events in Mexico City are two of our F1 team. One who's still out there and has given up on an exciting trip to join us. That's how dedicated he is. Ronald Vording, thank you very much. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, I stayed one day longer in Mexico City to go and visit the pyramids, which are like 1.5 hours away. But yeah, Autosport podcast, of course, much more important. So I think the pyramids have to wait one more year.
I feel really bad. I think if we ever actually get to meet in person, I will definitely owe you several pints or coffees or whatever it is you fancy drinking at that particular moment. But thank you very much for joining us. And also joining us, Jake Boxall-Legge, not out in Mexico, but obviously following the weekend's event. So how are you doing, Jake? Not giving up on any trips to the pyramids to join us?
No, as far as I know, there's not any well-known pyramids in West London. So I'm getting on level terms with the weird sleep schedule of doing the Mexico Grand Prix weekend from home. So forgive me if I'm a little bit more spacey than usual.
Yes, yeah, that is a different sort of challenge. So, well, let's get into the basics of the race first of all with the race report. Lando Norris dominated from pole, taking lights to flag victory, probably his most consummate victory and drive of his F1 career so far. Charles Leclerc finished second, around half a minute behind, but of course he had Max Verstappen bearing down on him, who Red Bull put him on the alternative strategy, starting on the medium. He went long, he ended on the soft. And you always know this with Verstappen, you can never count him out, and suddenly he looked like a good bet for second until the virtual safety car for Carlos Sainz's Williams was brought out. Ollie Bearman took advantage of a lot of battling, especially in the early part of the race that we'll come to in a minute, to take 4th for Haas. And Oscar Piastri, having qualified only 7th, managed to come through to finish 5th, which was sort of a salvage operation, but it wasn't quite enough to keep him in the lead of the championship. Elsewhere, Lewis Hamilton showed promising pace over the weekend, but was penalised 10 seconds for leaving the track and gaining an advantage. Lots to discuss about his day. And we'll also have a look at that VSC that denied Verstappen the chance to take the place from Leclerc, and of course Piastri to overtake Bearman. Well, I think that looked less likely from where I was sitting. So let's get into it, guys, with the debrief. Well, let's go to you first, Ronald. I mean, the turn 1 chaos. We had Max making it 4 wide, running off. Charles Leclerc bailing, I thought, basically once he'd already done the first corner. That was all rather strange. So how did you see? And there were no penalties in the end from that. So did you think that was fair? What did you make of it all?
Well, I think the track is now optional in Mexico City on lap 1, turn 1. You can basically go wherever you want. So yeah, George Russell was really unhappy about it. The same for Fernando Alonso. Well, I think there are two ways of looking at it. Of course, the ones that maybe stayed on track feel they were penalized in a way. On the other hand, I'm quite happy that the stewards let them race in a way, because everyone was excited before the start. Okay, Mexico turn 1, that's going to be chaos. And it was. And we want drivers to go for those moves. We want Max to go around the outside and try to go from P4 to P1. And in Max's case, one thing I'm still wondering, and I think no one asked him after the race, if he actually, because he rejoined in P3, then he lost 1 place. I'm still not sure if he lost that deliberately to avoid a penalty, or if he just lost it and that it was basically saved Red Bull from getting a penalty. But yeah, it was chaos. I saw some great memes already on social media with all the lines taken by different drivers, and some of those lines were fairly interesting. Also, if you look at the onboard, Max really kept the pedal to the metal on the grass. You see him correcting the steering wheel, so that could have ended quite badly for him as well. But yeah, I mean, in the end, I'm quite happy with no penalties being applied and just the steward saying, okay, lap 1, turn 1, racing incident just continue. So for me, it was fine like this.
Yeah, I must admit, the Verstappen one, I think it wasn't so much that he decided to fall into fourth, but I think he was, maybe there was enough doubt in his mind not to be full aggressive Verstappen at that point. The one that Jake, the one that I actually thought was more egregious that people didn't talk about as much was Leclerc, because Hamilton had got him, and Hamilton was giving him the room, and Leclerc just decided to dive across the grass anyway and maintain second. So I can understand why Lewis was a bit annoyed about that. Is that fair, or do you think, as Ronald says, it was just so chaotic, just let all get on with it, and we'll do penalties on another lap?
The Leclerc incident was interesting because he came out actually some way ahead of Norris and had to concede that. I can understand why Lewis was aggrieved by that situation. But it's just, again, it's turn one. We have a situation where the circuit is in such a way, the runoff has been built in such a way that it just allows this to happen. Because at the moment, as it is, you just have a turn one where you can just go, oh, that guy was slightly close to me, I had to go off. And we come to expect this every year in Mexico. Usually we're expecting some kind of crash rather than 6 of the top 10 going off the track. But I can understand why certain drivers are aggrieved. And particularly, I think if you listen to all of the team radio traffic, I think the one that was most vocal about it was, unpredictably, Fernando Alonso, who various points said, this is one for race control. Can I just skip turn 1 and 2 because everyone else did? I think something needs to be fixed for next year.
Yeah, it doesn't really look like a great advert for it, because I think the Grand Prix overall was pretty interesting. I don't know what the answer is, though. I don't think you can put obstacles there, but maybe some bumps or something that means that drivers have to slow down more when they go off track.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. But at the same time, I feel that can take some of the excitement away in Mexico turn 1, because then drivers will probably be a bit more cautious. And now, especially in the build-up to the race, you could even feel it in the paddock. Everyone knew that something would happen in turn 1, and everyone knows that Mexico turn 1 is such a special and unique place on the F1 calendar. So yes, maybe we can think about ways to make it more fair or make it more punishing for drivers who go off. But I also think that will make them more cautious and probably takes away some of the drama. So, to some extent, I don't mind, because we've seen Checo Perez trying to win the race in turn 1 2 years ago, didn't quite work out. But that's also the charming bit of Mexico. So for me, it gives us something to talk about also. So to be honest, maybe I'm the only one, but I don't really mind.
Fair enough. Well, let's get on to another one of those controversial incidents. So I'm just going to outline the basics of this, and then you guys can argue about it. So Max Verstappen attacks Lewis Hamilton into turn 1. Lewis Hamilton hangs on around the outside. Verstappen jumps across the grass at turn 2. They go down towards the next left-hander, where Hamilton locks up, goes off, doesn't use the prescribed circuit back onto the track, and keeps his position when he rejoins and decides to clear off. Now, obviously, Ferrari and Hamilton decided not to back off. They were initially investigated for not following the instructions of how to get back on track. He was not penalised for that, but he then was penalised for gaining an advantage in overtaking Verstappen. So, Jake, let's start with you. Do you think that's fair? Was that a fair penalty in here? Were you surprised?
No, to be honest. I mean, if you saw the way that he went into the corner and just completely missed turn 5, cut across the grass, he did leave the track and gain an advantage. People maybe think the 10 seconds is more unfair rather than the penalty itself. And I've seen a lot more, let's say, 50-50 incidents where the driver makes a tiny little thing. I think I was watching back through some of the Jeddah highlights from last year the other day, actually. Magnussen went a little way off the curb and stayed ahead of Tsunoda and got a 10 seconds. So I don't think there's too much argument to be had with that. I think there will be some grievances in the way that, let's say, Verstappen went off the track maybe at turn 3. But I think when you look at the way the two drivers were overlapping each other at turn 1 to 3, I don't think that Hamilton can have too much of a complaint. And as it happened anyway, Verstappen got punished for it because it gave Behrman the opportunity to just stuff his car down the inside and make the move.
Which actually brings in a point I wanted to raise with Ronald. On the TV feed, much was made of the commentary team that Ferrari had sort of let Hamilton down by not telling him to back off and sort of give up that space. But actually, I thought it was quite sensible they didn't, because if he'd looked in his mirrors and he'd seen anything in them, which with the modern F1 cars is pretty difficult, he'd have seen a Red Bull, a Haas and 2 Mercedes in a huge mass, and how on earth you would back off and slot yourself in correctly there. I thought at that point it was probably the right thing to do, to just crack on and see if you can make up enough time on track to kind of mitigate against that 10-second penalty that they thought would probably come anyway. Was that fair? Was that ever a suggestion that perhaps Ferrari should have got Hamilton to back off at the time?
Well, I get your point, but at the same time, getting 10 seconds on pure race pace, I mean, in my opinion, that was always going to be pretty tough, especially looking at the Ferrari race pace. Also, that tire degradation was quite a big unknown going into the race. So if they knew the 10 seconds penalty was coming, then taking that gamble, we were going to get that 10 seconds anyway, I think that was quite a big gamble. And also, to me, the communication afterwards was not great, because on the radio they told Lewis, we got a 10-second penalty for the turn 4 incident, implying that it was for the moment with Max himself. And then, of course, Lewis went on saying, but it was the dustiest part on earth, and it's where should I go? But of course it was not for that. It was because he gained the lasting advantage and didn't give it up. So I think they did make 2 mistakes, I would say.
And did Ferrari say anything about potential damage after going off? Because his pace prior to that hadn't been too bad, but obviously in the latter part of the race, he really didn't get back into that pack that was effectively fighting for 4th in the end. Was there was some sort of rumour there might be a little bit of damage? Was that ever confirmed?
I've seen those suggestions as well, that Hamilton had a little bit of damage there, and as I'm sure we'll go into a little bit later, either way, the pace post-incident was just not really anywhere. And I kind of expected him to come back into that pack and start putting the 2 Mercedes drivers under a little bit of pressure, but that just never really happened. The other aspect to add to that as well is Ferrari had to dip into its usual lift and coast modes relatively early to ensure it had the cooling, ensure it was getting the tyres, it kept the tyres into the right place. So that can be another factor as well.
Well, let's get on to some even more serious matters than Ferrari's lack of race pace compared to perhaps its qualifying, which was we had Marshals on the track, which is a context for the late virtual safety car as well, I think. So, Ronald, perhaps for those that perhaps missed it, could you just talk us through what happened with the Marshals on track? Because it was quite a worrying moment, wasn't it?
Yeah, and even the FIA said that afterwards, by the way. They said when we saw it in race control, we were actually quite scared. Of course, it was not on TV, but it was debris on the outside of turn 3. And then they gave the Marshals the message to be on standby and to pick it up. But obviously, they missed that Liam Lawson went into the pit lane to change his front wing. So he was way behind the rest of the pack. When they found out, they gave the message to the Marshal, okay, don't do anything because there's still 1 car coming. But for some reason, and the FIA is still investigating why, Marshals were still on track. And it was a really, really, really close call with Liam, who really got scared on the radio himself and said, well, yeah, I could have killed him, basically. It was his quote. So that's something that should never happen. The funny bit is after the FIA gave that statement that, okay, we kind of gave the second message, still the Marshals were on track. Then 5 minutes later, they gave another message to say, yeah, but we do want to emphasize that the Marshals are extremely professional and stuff like that. So that was a note that they wanted to add. But still, I think there's probably a bit of miscommunication there between race control and the Marshals that could have ended, much, much, much worse than it did. And if you talk about, we will talk about it in a minute, but if you give a late safety car for a car that's miles off the ideal racing line at the end of the race and you compare it to this, then... yeah, what do I say?
Well, do you think that's why? Do you think that's perhaps I mean, anyone who's had the misfortune of seeing the footage of Tom Price at the 1977 South African Grand Prix will know why it's no laughing matter having Marshals on tracks. It really is incredibly dangerous for everyone concerned. But do you think maybe that was the context of the late virtual safety car then? Were they being super cautious because of that sort of incident? Or do you think they would have called that anyway?
Well, the FIA says it had nothing to do with the other incident because they said they got first of all, they said the car was in a vulnerable position. I think that's the bit you can argue about because Carlos tried to get it out of the way. And I think he did quite well. I mean, Helmut Marko told me he could have done better, but I don't know. Anyway, I think Carlos did quite okay, but the FIA still thought that it was in a vulnerable position. And then race control got the message that there was some smoke and some fire. And they said, okay, then with a combination of vulnerable position and that second message automatically leads to a race neutralization. And in this case, they opted for the virtual safety car. So they say it's standard procedure. The funny bit is, I think after the race, I was the first one to ask the FIA for a statement on it. And first of all, they were a bit surprised because they said, statement? Because there's nothing to explain, right? It's normal. And I said, well, probably some fans disagree. And also some international colleagues already asked me for a bit of explanation. So then later on, the FIA also found out there was quite some, a lot of fans unhappy about the fact that two great battles were taken away from them, basically.
Now, Jake, that was kind of why we're talking about this, right? If it had been a boring race with 10, 15 seconds between each car or whatever, no battles going on, we probably wouldn't be talking about this VSC, because the reason it's significant is because Max Verstappen was poised to have a go at Charles Leclerc for second, which it looked like he was probably going to get, and Oscar Piastri was chasing Ollie Behrman, who I'm not convinced he would have got, but it was, it was nip and tuck with those battles. But what did you think, Jay? I mean, obviously it's disappointing whenever you get battles stopped by something like that, but do you think it was the right decision?
If you're in a situation where there's going to be fire, then you are, and the way the car was positioned behind the thing, then the marshal's going to need to go on into the stadium a little bit to actually clear the fire as well. So it's just, I think, in that particular situation, maybe it was needed, but again, it was a shame because we were having two very, very good battles on the circuit. I think, Verstappen was pretty much there with Leclerc. I think Leclerc would have defended very, very hard to try and keep that position, but I don't think he would. I think Max absolutely had that. And I thought he took it very magnanimously, actually. He just said, you win some, you lose some. And he said, I'm sure the safety cars benefited me in the past as well. So,
yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I was going to make that point. I thought it was probably the most sensible comment about the incident from anyone was Verstappen going, well, you win some, you lose some, we move on. It's like, so yeah, perhaps a good message there that sometimes they things fall for you, don't they? And sometimes they don't. So I think he was probably quite pleased with the performance of the car, given the difficult weekend they'd having up to that point. But let's finish the debrief before we go on to look at the driver ratings, the top 5 and bottom 5 that we're going to look at. Ollie Behrman, breakthrough, 4th place, great result for Haas, great result for him because he's shown flashes of pace, particularly against Esteban Ocon, who's no slouch himself, but he has also had some fairly wild moments during the season, and this was just a really consistent, solid, not making mistakes, faster cars behind. So Ronald, I mean, that was got to be one of the standout moments of the whole weekend, really, was Behrman's rise up from 9th to 4th.
Yeah, and especially the race pace. It massively surprised me because you mentioned the glimpses of speed, but that was mostly on qualifying, because I'm really impressed with his qualifying performance, because especially on Saturday he can squeeze out everything over one lap and indeed beat Esteban Ocon in doing so. But his race pace was unbelievable. You said there were faster cars behind, but they were not even that much faster because he could defend quite easily also into turn 1. Whenever they got into DRS, he never got into too much trouble. So it showed me two things. First of all, how incredibly mature his drive was. He did not get afraid. Okay, afterwards in the pen, he said, when I was side by side with Max Verstappen, I felt something that I cannot say on camera. But so he was getting a bit nervous then. But that's normal because also, of course, he didn't want to decide the title fight, basically. So, but I think in this whole defending, he was incredibly mature. And secondly, I don't know if it's the Austin upgrade package, but the Haas race pace, at least on his side, was just unbelievable. So I think, as a team, they made significant steps on the Sunday also to keep tires alive and to really go well in the low grip conditions that we had in Mexico, because, track temperatures were unusually high for Mexico. And then Oliver Behrman putting in that kind of performance. Yeah, it's definitely the standout moment of the weekend for me.
Well, Jake, I'm going to come to you with the Haas upgrade. You've done a lot of work on this rule set recently, both the magazine and online, and you've been looking at the developments that are still coming through. And looking at the constructors' points, it's pretty incredible now, isn't it? Haas are on 62. They're just 2 points ahead of Sauber. It's just 7 behind Aston Martin, and Racing Bulls are only 3 ahead of them. So the fight for 6th is pretty incredible. Do you see this now as Haas being competitive and fighting for that 6th and 7th place for the rest of the season?
I think, again, it's always going to be circuit specific, and you have seen throughout the season this ebb and flow between all of the midfield teams. But what it has done is given the team an opportunity to be there more often. A lot of that has been down to how the floor responds to higher speed, higher load conditions. It's a circuit that should have played to the Haas's strengths anyway. But I think the more salient point of that is this was visible in Behrman's FP2 long runs. He was, I think, on average 0.4 of a second per lap off Lando Norris, which, given that everybody was looking at Lando Norris's times from Friday and going, okay, how has he done that? For Behrman to be not that far away from Norris is pretty incredible. I would expect Brazil to, maybe it won't mesh with the Haas, and maybe it will sort of go towards, you would sense that it will go towards the racing bulls a little bit in that midfield battle. But they can be there every weekend if they can just get that floor dialed in relatively early, which they did in Mexico.
Yeah, well done to Haas and Ollie Behrman for their fourth place. Right, well, let's get on to the driver ratings section. So poor old Jake Boxall-Legge has to do marks out of 10 for every driver across the weekend following the end of the Grand Prix. And if you want to see all 20, you can go on to Autosport.com and have a look at how much you agree and disagree with Jake's numbers. But what we're going to do this time is we're going to pick out the top 5 scores and the bottom 5 scores. Jake's going to say why, and then me and Ronald are going to see if we agree or disagree with them or not. So, Jake, we're going to do the top 5 first. We're going to start at the top. We're going to go 5th to first. So, 5th, the only 8 out of 10 you gave, actually, was Gabriel Bortoletto. Why did you give him such a high score?
So, I think this one was very race heavy. He didn't qualify particularly well and got knocked out in Q1, but what he did in the race was really quite stellar. He got through a lot of the lower midfield very, very easily. And then he had a very, very long battle with Isaac Hadjar through the race. And that was the deciding point for the final point. The move that he put on him was incredibly forceful. It was, no, you're not getting through again.
Yeah, 16th to 10th, we should say, for Bortoletto. Ronald, any disagreement with that?
No, and especially I think we have to mention after Austin. So I think to put in a performance like that also mentally was important for him to bounce back immediately. So yeah, I do agree with Jake.
Excellent. Right. Well, top. We've got equal third next, both on 9. So Jake, I want you to tell us why you've got them on 9, and then pick an order, please. Who's actually third? Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen, second and third overall. 9 out of 10. Explain.
So my feeling is that Verstappen would be third, and but I think maybe a little bit of recency bias creeps into that because Leclerc had the better qualifying session, arguably had the better first stint of the race, but Verstappen did so much work on that second stint that it dug out what was going to be, on the evidence of the medium tyres, barely a top 6 finish. I think a 9 just sort of felt right given that he rescued what was looking to be a really, really horrible weekend.
See, I'm struggling to see which one I agree with the 9s, but I don't know who I'd put ahead because I think Leclerc should have got a penalty for driving off at the first corner because I think that was a nonsense. I think Max was a bit lucky to get away with no penalty for pushing Lewis Hamilton off the road when he attacked him. So 10 seconds to both their times puts them in exactly the same position. The VSC still happened, so I'm very nip and tuck. Ronald, who do you think should be third? Or do you not agree with the 9s at all?
Yeah, I do. Because especially, in Max's case, he didn't believe the podium was possible. It was funny on Saturday because we had first I talked to Helmut Marko. Let me explain. And he said, we went too low with the right height, basically. So the car bottomed out in turn 9. But he said in the race, it's not going to be a disadvantage because we will go slower through that high-speed section. So car will be a bit higher and the bottoming will not be an issue anymore. Then we had the Dutch media session with Max. But he was quite frustrated because he said we need to be perfect for a shot at the title. And of course, Saturday was not perfect at all. So then I put the Helmut Marko quote to him. I said, well, Marko said, okay, it's not going to be an issue on Sunday. And while I asked the question, he already started laughing. And he usually does when he is frustrated and he hears all the optimism from Helmut Marko. So he went like, no, the car doesn't work today. The car also won't work tomorrow. Let's just leave it like that. The car doesn't work this weekend. So Helmut was the only one within the team who believed the podium was possible. He also wanted to place a bet on it, but no one within the team wanted to make a bet with him. And also I didn't do it because I know the sums of money involved, and if I would do it, I would probably work an entire year for absolutely nothing. So I played it safe, but then he still got P3 in the end. So I think, also Laurent Mekies said at the end, if we can do the weekend again and optimize everything, we probably would still not be able to beat Lando. So P2 would be the optimum in every scenario, and he almost got P2 without that virtual safety car. So I think actually, based on Sunday, a 9 is probably correct.
It's a bit of a Verstappen Red Bull kind of thing, though, isn't it? There was Friday. Oh, Friday's terrible. We're awful. We're not going to be anywhere. And I always go, yeah.
But not the last couple of weeks, though, because the last couple of weeks, they've always been quite honest since Monza, saying, oh, with the new floor, we're going to be in it. We're going to challenge for the win.
That's true. Well, that's putting pressure on McLaren, isn't it?
Also, so yeah, but Mexico in that regard was different from, let's say, Monza, Baku, Singapore, Austin. So it was in a way maybe a step back, but Max said it's linked to overheating the tires because you're sliding a bit more with the low grip, and if you slide, you overheat the tires, and then you start to slide even more, and you overheat the tires even more. So he thinks that's the reason why it was a more difficult one for Red Bull.
Yeah, fair enough. Right, well, you've got a 2 tied at the top for first place on 10 out of 10. It's not really a shock to guess who these 2 drivers are, but I'm going to make Jake pick a winner. It's Ollie Behrman, as we've already discussed, in 4th, and of course, runaway winner, Lando Norris. So flawless from both. Who are you going to put as your number 1, Jake?
This is unfair because I draw your attention to what you said about 3 minutes ago. You said, oh, well, Leclerc and Verstappen balance themselves out, but I've got to pick a winner. Okay. Let's make it Lando, I think. And the thing is, it didn't look like he was going to qualify quite like that on Friday. Again, he went to the media and he said, we've got work to do because 1 lap pace isn't really anywhere. Both McLaren drivers were struggling to kind of throw it through the lap and get all of the sectors stitched up nicely that makes a good lap time. It did take them sort of a few more goes in FP2 and they were getting close, but by then those soft tyres had gone off a little bit, so you didn't really see where the time necessarily had was. But again, that stint in FP2 on race pace was looking so strong, and he replicated it and qualified by some margin. I think he went, almost 8/10 up in terms of progression from his first Q3 lap to his second one, which is crazy, especially in the context of the title race. All of the pressure, everything said about Lando Norris, that mentally he just doesn't have it, and Verstappen's going to come up, and I still think that Max is going to win the title, but Lando is just on form at the moment.
Oh, well, there's that. I mean, you've diverted us off there with you still think that Verstappen's going to win the championship. We're going to have to come back to that in a minute. But before we do, Ronald, any disagreement there? Would you have put Lando at number 1 ahead of Ollie Behrman?
No, because I agree with everything he said on Lando, but I will put Behrman on number 1, and I'll explain why. Because, of course, the way in which Lando dominated was incredibly impressive. So I always expected Lando to win, and I definitely didn't expect Ollie Behrman to put in the performance like he did. So yes, incredibly impressive what Lando did in qualifying, especially given his qualifying struggles earlier in the year. Race pace was on a completely different level. But I'm still more impressed with Haas and Ollie Behrman, so I have to give the number 1 spot to him, as I think most fans did by voting him driver of the day.
Yes, they did. Should say that. Which normally I'm a bit sceptical about the drive of the day. I think some of the winners of that have been mad, actually, but that one was a pretty sensible one. But before we go on to the bottom 5, we just have a quick word about the Jake's point that Max Verstappen will be world champion. So let's have a look at the points. Lando Norris is just 1 point ahead of Oscar Piastri after that sort of fairly mediocre weekend from the Australian, and Verstappen is 36 points behind Norris. So Ronald, Jake's already said what he thinks. So do you think that Verstappen can still do it? Do they still think they can do it?
Well, yeah. Well, they can do it. I think they can do it. They think they can do it, but they keep using the word perfect. For that reason, I don't know. If I have to put my money on someone, again, with my salary, I will not do it, but I probably will put it on Lando, given his strong form. And for Red Bull, it was difficult in Mexico. When I was talking to Max, he also expects it to be difficult in Vegas, then we go to Qatar, which should also be quite okay for McLaren. So yes, I do think that Red Bull will be in the mix. I also think if you look at the three drivers, which one is like the least likely to make mistakes and crack under pressure? Of course, that's Max. But I don't know. I maybe think it's not going to be enough. And maybe that turnaround they had with the car and with the Monza upgrade, the floor and then the ride height steps, maybe it just came a little bit too late.
Well, we'll have to wait and see over the final rounds. Right, well, let's get into the bottom five of Jake's driver ratings, which, I don't know, are they more fun? Mate? Well, let's find out. So in fifth, on 6 out of 10, Franco Colapinto. Jake, why 6, and why is he the worst of your 6s? Because there were a few 6s in your run this time.
The reason Colapinto has a 6 to begin with, I thought that it was given the difficulty of the weekend and the fact that Alpine was like, you know what, just have the hard tyres at the start and just go long. In that car, on that tyre, he was very, 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 very slow. And he did a half spin at the start of the race, which is why that I've made him the worst 6 out of 10 scorer. But there was promise, because once he was on the soft tyre towards the end of the race, his pace was actually very good. Wasn't quite up there with the sort of Verstappen Norris kind of pace, but you know, if he was a car, if you had transplanted him into this battle between Piastri and the Mercedes, he would have been there on pace with them, which I thought was really impressive. And you know, there's moments this weekend as well where it hasn't been easy, and to be thrown into that Alpine sort of mid-season and there being basically no updates for him, it's been a really difficult situation for him. And I think actually he's coming out of it the other side stronger, and the fact that he's just sort of, I would say, now on pace with Gasly, I think under the radar he's done a good job this year.
What do you think, Ron? Do you think that's fair? Do you think Colapinto is sort of re-finding his feet again? Obviously, he had that explosive arrival with Williams, and then it, you know, went a little bit off the rails, and now he's got another chance with Alpine. Do you think he's sort of stepping into the role of being an F1 driver now?
Well, at least if you look at the qualifying performances, I mean, he's out-qualified Pierre Gasly quite some times in recent weeks, so I think he's getting there. As Jake said, basically no one sees it because Alpine is struggling massively, and it also hits the morale a bit within the team. Of course, if we speak to Pierre on a Thursday, he already knows that another really, really tough weekend is coming. If the Alpine choice for 26 is really between Colapinto and Paul Aron, I think for the 26 seat, he's at least doing what you can expect from him, given that the car is so poor and that all the focus is on 26 basically from the beginning of this year already.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Right, well, let's get into the bottom four. I'm going to name them all at once because they all scored 5 out of 10 in Jake's driver ratings, and then I'm going to get him to pick the person that gets the wooden spoon. So 5 out of 10s went to Lewis Hamilton, who finished 8th, Yuki Tsunoda, who finished 11th, Lance Stroll, who finished 14th, and Liam Lawson, who retired. So, Jake, who gets the wooden spoon for this one with their 5 out of 10?
I don't know.
That's why you gave them 5 out of 10.
Yeah, that's why I all gave them the same score, because I don't think Lewis Hamilton will be the wooden spoon taker, because maybe it was a little bit harsh, but I do think that, again, just skipping the circuit at turn 5 and costing himself a potential podium, that probably deserves to be looked dimly upon, because, again, after Saturday, he was looking really good, really chipper in what you would say is good Lewis Hamilton form with the media. But, yeah, I think he just ruined his chances there. Lawson didn't qualify particularly well, did blame Sainz for sort of cutting across him as they were both going off the track, but Sainz had been avoiding Ocon at the same time, so there wasn't really much that he could do in that situation. Stroll spun at the start and then did nothing. So a peek behind the curtain for those listening to this, every time I get into the driver ratings, every time I get down to Lance Stroll, it's like, oh my God. Don't never say that I don't do my homework. I do, and most of it's spent looking at what Lance Stroll did on a Sunday night. And who was the other one? Yuki Tsunoda. Yes, so had been in contention for points, but I just think some of the defensive moves were really, really ropey. Race pace, if you look at his race pace, it's not good. It's not that good. And he says his race pace is really improved, but kind of hasn't.
There was a point, though, wasn't there? And I'll bring Ronald in on this. There was a point when he was on the medium tyre with Verstappen that he wasn't losing a huge amount of time to Verstappen on the medium tyre, but then he obviously went through the tyre quicker. That was one of Max's great skills, and he was left out, wasn't he, as a spoiler for everyone else to have to work their way through. So I think he probably wasn't even on his own optimal strategy. So Ronald, would you agree that perhaps the Tsunoda 5 out of 10 is a little bit harsh? Perhaps the Hamilton one's a bit harsh? Any others you disagree with?
Yeah, at least I would give Tsunoda a 6, I would say, because as you said, I think there were two reasons behind his race-based struggles. The first one is that he was basically forced to play the team role, which also is important to mention that he said himself on Thursday that he's willing to do that. He said, I'm willing to do everything to help Max. And basically I asked him also in the press conference, okay, how? Because if you're so far back, how can you help him? And then he explained, well, I can still, in FP1, I can try different setups, and then the team has 2 data sets to look at. And also I can compromise my strategy and stay out longer to hold up other people. And that's exactly what he did. And to be fair, his mediums were completely gone at that stage, but I think he still did quite okay, because I look back at one lap where one of the Mercedes got him into turn 1, but Oscar didn't. And then, of course, Oscar got him the next lap. But as a result of that, he lost 2 or 2.5 seconds. And that's exactly what Red Bull wants to see from Yuki. After the race, when I talked to Helmut Marko, I said, well, what was behind Yuki's strategy? Was it to help Max and hold off some of the others? And he said, he smiled, and then he said, I didn't really notice that. So, of course, that was a joke, because that was the whole point. But I think given, his contribution to the team and taking the slow pit stop into account, I would probably give him a 6. And maybe I would give Carlos Sainz a 5, because I mean, on Saturday it was okay, but I found his race really messy. Of course, he had the issue with the pit limiter and getting the drive-through penalty, but I think he got into some of those 50-50 moves, and overall, I just did not find him impressive, and some of that I think was down to his own performance. So I would probably swap Yuki and Carlos on this one.
So let's help Jake out, because he clearly doesn't want to pick a total worst wooden spoon winner. It's not Lewis Hamilton. It's not Yuki Tsunoda. You've put Carlos Sainz into the frame. Who would you pick? Who would be your 4.9 out of 10?
Yeah, maybe Stroll, but it's so difficult because of course he spun on his own and didn't do anything massively impressive after that. But then at the same time, Aston Martin is a bit in the same boat as Alpine. The car is clearly not good enough, to the frustration of Fernando Alonso. So, yeah, what can you expect? So it's also easy to pick Stroll. Maybe it's a bit too easy in this one, but yeah.
This is the dilemma I go through at 2:00 every Sunday, or 2:00 every Monday morning, technically.
We're very sorry to make you have to relive the pain right now, and we'll continue to do so in each post-Grand Prix podcast. So here we go. So, well, I mean, let us know what you think. Why don't you email us in, drop us a line. Well, I was going to give out Jake's email address. I'll give out mine, kevin.turner@autosport.com. Who should have won the wooden spoon for the Mexican Grand Prix? And maybe I'll read it out in a future podcast. Right, let's get on to On the Limiter, which is obviously my favourite section, which is basically where I get to rant about things that annoy me from the weekend and see if my guests agree. Now, on this week, I've got 2. One of them I think there will be total agreement on, but I just wanted to sort of acknowledge it really and really get Ronald's view on it from the ground, which was the booing of Lando Norris. I don't like it when any sports person is booed. I didn't like it when Max Verstappen was booed. It's just, these are absolute top athletes, and in Norris's case this weekend, putting in a fantastic weekend under pressure in the championship. So, Ronald, did there feel like there was quite a lot of anti-Norris feeling while you were out there?
Yeah, but to some extent it changed massively, because I remember a couple of years ago when Checo was still driving, they were all booing Max Verstappen, and now I think they're cheering. Yeah, and now I think they're cheering the most for him. So that flipped around completely. It was exactly the same in Monza. But yeah, indeed, you could even hear it in the press room because it's close to the Foro Sol, to the stadium section. So a lot of booing, and also some of the British colleagues, they looked at me and said, why the Lando hate? And then at least there came some kind of explanation during the post-race press conference, because Lando was asked about it. He said, I have no clue. And then next, local journalist got the mic, and he said, it's probably because there was a poll on a certain website, and most of the votes went to the idea that McLaren gifts the world title to Lando. That's how probably most of the Mexicans feel. And then he also said the Mexicans feel that he has to give up the 3 points from Monza. And then Lando went, okay, if you want the 3 points, you can have them. And he also added, I can't stop. I can't stop laughing. So Lando was quite calm. I think, as you said, all those athletes are performing on an incredibly high level. So if you want to boo or disagree with something, it's probably with the way McLaren is handling this whole title fight, and probably not Lando as an individual, because yes, they made it incredibly difficult for themselves already in Monza, and then they got into the complexity of every little detail and every moment that every driver will challenge it and say, hey, now we have to swap positions as well. And we've talked about it many times, but I think that's the whole issue, that McLaren made life way too difficult for themselves. But I don't know if Lando is the one to blame for that, but clearly that's what happened in Mexico.
I mean, that is a brilliant segue you've given me for my next item, and this was not planned, ladies and gentlemen, but actually it's overly nice or not team orders, but not about McLaren, which is the other thing I want to rant about. I think McLaren have got themselves into trouble by trying to be too nice and too fair, and I feel like another team was guilty of that in Mexico, and it was Mercedes. Why on earth would you leave George Russell, who has been your lead driver, your star driver, one of the best drivers of the year, frying his tyres when behind Kimi Antonelli, when he's got Ollie Behrman up the road to chase and Oscar Piastri arriving behind him in a quick McLaren, and they didn't, and then they did. So basically they made him cross and then made Antonelli get out of the way anyway. So they got the worst of both worlds. So Jake, help me out here. Is there any reason why you can think that Mercedes... for me, it was an absolute no-brainer. Russell arrives, get out the way, go after Behrman. Am I being harsh? Am I missing something?
The thing is, I'm not usually, unless it's a really obvious, they were 5 seconds behind on the previous lap, and now they're 2 seconds behind. If it's really obvious like that. But I do kind of agree. I think actually, if you go in retrospect, you do that move 5-6 laps earlier, especially when Piastri comes on the scene as well. Actually, I think they made it harder by waiting, because Antonelli had to give up the place and immediately slip back in behind Russell, because otherwise Piastri would have got past him at turn 4. So I think they made it a little bit harder for themselves. Again, I don't really like watching the invert position sort of things, but I understand from a tactical, strategic point of view that it is necessary sometimes. And in that moment, you have to be decisive, and I don't think they were.
I just think everyone needs to accept that it's a team sport and they're going to swap cars around. Red Bull have been very essentially had a one-car team, like Ron was saying about Yuki Tsunoda helping out Max Verstappen. Like, there is a time, and it's not like Mercedes are dealing with a situation that McLaren have got when you've got 2 cars in the title fight. They've got one guy who's right up there in 4th place in the championship and not a million miles away behind Verstappen. Okay, he's not going to catch him, but he's in a pretty solid place. And Antonelli's absolutely miles behind. And Russell's got all the form as well in terms of race pace and things. I just thought it was astonishing. Ronald, did you have any insights on that at the track?
No, I think I fully agree. I mean, it's not affecting the title fight at all. So then you always have to maximize your chances to at least get on the podium, and then you have to be decisive. And I think make a call much quicker than they did. So yeah, I fully agree with this one. Well, yeah, I just have one question on the whole thing, basically, one remaining question, and that's going back to his whole interesting radio conversation. If by now he has removed the McLaren car from his, let's say, back end, because I think Oscar would be quite happy to use it again in Sao Paulo.
Yeah, Russell doesn't always come across at the best with his radio messages, does he? He's he doesn't have a way with words when he's on the radio. But I think he was right on this occasion, which was really where my rant came in. Well, that's quite enough from me. So thanks very much for joining us for this episode of the Autosport F1 podcast. We'll be back after the Brazilian Grand Prix. So from Ronald Vording, Jake Boxall-Legge, and me, Kevin Turner, it's goodbye for now.